Welcome back, kids, to Story Time with Kurt Thompson, Music History 101. And we continue on, and we are now at Wagner. I already know some interesting trivial facts about Wagner. Let's see if they're also included in what I'm reading here. Wagner, inspiration for Hitler and a whole entire movement of nationalism in Germany. So Wagner, either you like Wagner's music or you don't. You may or may not care to hear my opinion, but just for the record, I don't really care for his stuff. I mean, some of it, yeah, I feel a little something, a little bit of power there, but man, like the Ring Cycle. I mean, some of his stuff just goes on and on. It's almost just like he created it long so he could hear himself over and over again and what he'd done. So it's just not my cup of tea. But then again, if I had been born in Germany or that area, maybe I would absolutely be in love with it. Who knows? So, again, for some people, Wagnerian opera represents the highest form of art as a synthesis of music and drama. For others, it's just fat people shouting at each other in German for what seems like eternity. Oh, I was already kind of right, wasn't I? Personally, I'm inclined to agree with Rossini, who said that Wagner has good moments, but bad quarter hours. Wagner was born in 1813 in Leipzig to Johanna and her husband Karl Friedrich Wagner. Oh, by the way, folks, for people who aren't really into music that much, as far as music history, maybe you're not even a musician, maybe you stumbled on this by accident, you clicked on this video by accident, you're going to see the name, it looks like Wagner. Like Richard Wagner or Robert Wagner, what's that show called? I want to say Heart to Heart. There we go. Remember Robert Wagner and the other lady? Can't remember her name. Anyway, it's not Wagner. So you're going to see Wagner when we're talking about Wagner, but they pronounce it with a V, Wagner, and not Vag. So W-A-G-N-E-R, Wagner. You won't be pronouncing it that way. No, I'm horrible with German and just about everything else. It's not my language, and nor do I care to really learn much about it. But I do know that we don't pronounce Wagner. So just a note for that, if you want to impress some family and friends and corporate business partners and colleagues at the watering hole. It's a Wagner, even though it looks like Wagner. To continue on, the baby was named Wilhelm Richard, although he quickly dropped the Wilhelm. And it may have been Wilhelm, for all we know. 6 months after the boy was born, Johanna's first husband died, and she remarried an actor named Ludwig Geyer. And what do they say about Ludwig here? Ludwig was what you might call a longtime friend of the family. Oddly enough, young Richard Wagner, who we're talking about, looked a lot like him. Well, it looks like there's a little hanky-panky going on there. So, for a while in his boyhood, Richard, that's actually Richard, but of course they pronounce it Richard. I'm just going to call it Richard, what the hell. Let's change his name to Richard. Richard took to using the surname Geyer, but he later changed it back to Wagner. So let's see what it says about that. He thought it had a better ring to it. Get it as a ring cycle. As a boy, Wagner could be troublesome at times. Every few nights he would wake up screaming at the top of his lungs just to let everyone know he was still there. And let's see what else. He didn't care for school much and was always playing hooky. One day his school informed his parents that he hadn't been to classes in 6 months, and would they please tell him if they saw him that he shouldn't expect to graduate. Wagner at this time had his heart set on becoming a famous poet or playwright. His first play, called Lubald, written when he was 14 or so, gave him some difficulty since by the fourth act 42 characters have died. In order to make the plot work out, he had to bring back most of them as ghosts. Wagner showed this early work to hardly anyone except his sister Kexley, if that's how you pronounce it. When he was 15 years old, Wagner heard Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for the first time, and it had a profound effect on him. Actually made him sick to his stomach, but he took that as a good sign. So from then on, he decided that he would become a great composer just like Beethoven. Wagner was convinced that Beethoven was the greatest musical genius ever born because Beethoven had such a thick skull. Well, he thought that was logical. Okay, well, I'm reading a lot of footnotes here, so the author of this book is a little bit goofy sometimes. Okay, among Wagner's first compositions was a concert overture. To keep all the instruments apart in his own mind, he wrote the score in different colors. The strings were in red ink, the woodwinds in green, the brass and percussion in black. The first performance was a disaster since everyone in the audience snickered at the kettle drum. Why would they do that? Huh. Okay, so Wagner enrolled at the University of Leipzig, where he majored in drinking and gambling, with a minor concentration to challenging others to sword duels. Yikes. And I guess it says here he never actually fought the sword duels. He once gambled away his mother's entire pension, but luckily won it back again on an all-or-nothing wager. Wagner didn't stay long at university. He left when he found out they expected him to go to classes too, just like they did in high school. Despite the disaster of his overture and the fact that he did not perform very well on any instrument, he was a rotten pianist and sang horribly. Wagner got a job directing a small, page turn, opera company in Magdeburg, where he met and married one of the singers, Mina Planer, or Planer, however you pronounce this. The first performance of a Wagner opera took place in Magdeburg, 1836. Das Liebesbad, based on Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, was not a rousing success. There were barely 2 performances. On the first night, the leading tenor forgot most of his lines and hid behind a big feather boa, hoping that might help. The second night never really got off the ground at all. The leading soprano's jealous husband went backstage and punched the second tenor on the nose, thinking they were having an affair. When she tried to stop her husband, he hit her too, and she fainted. To make matters worse, Wagner's pet dog, a poodle, had run away from home. Wagner had dogs all his life. I guess he was a great dog lover, and I like that. Me too. Over the years, there were 2 black poodles, Speck and Drek, several Newfoundlands, 2 spaniels, Peps and Flips, and Phipps, and a few terriers, and a Spitz named Putzie. Okay, well, at least we know his dogs' names. Okay, so continue on, in view of his operatic failure and to avoid paying the increasing debts, Wagner and Mina resorted to a strategy they were to follow many times again. They left town in a hurry. Hoping to put as much distance as possible between themselves and their angry creditors, the Wagner sailed to France and settled in Paris, where Wagner earned money doing hack work for a music publisher. Some musicologists think today that the boat voyage to France helped inspire Wagner to compose his opera Der Fliegende Holländer, or The Flying Dutchman. Dutchman and an earlier opera, Rienzi, were received favorably, so Wagner was offered a job as second Kapellmeister to the Dresden Opera House. He had a promise not to tamper with the way they performed Mozart and other standards. Wagner set to work on 2 more operas, Tannhäuser and Lohengrin. The first performance of Tannhäuser in 1845 went well, but left the audience rather bewildered. And the footnote here from the author is it's much the same way today. But he was just warming up. The real confusion would soon follow. Wagner got caught up in a revolutionary movement for a while and wrote angry tracts denouncing capitalism. But when the revolution was suppressed, he fled to Weimar and let's see, and the protection of the pianist and composer Franz Liszt. Not to mention his daughter Cosima, more on her later. Wagner's socialist phase didn't last very long, and within a few years he was writing about the vulgar egotism of the masses. Apart from his music, Wagner wrote essays and diatribes on a whole range of subjects, most of which he knew nothing about. There was that bit about Beethoven's skull, and also some unforgivable libelous insults flung at Jews. Adolf Hitler thought Wagner was wonderful. Does that give you the idea about Wagner and his popularity? In his later years, Wagner began extolling the virtues of vegetarianism. If we all stopped eating meat and ate only vegetables and fruit, he said, the world would be a better place. He also thought that we should all move to the equatorial zones where this would be easier. I guess easier to get fruit and vegetables. The lake shores in the north of Canada, Wagner wrote, are crowded with vegetarian panthers and tigers. If there were any vegetarian panthers and tigers in Canada in the late 19th century, they're gone by now. But Wagner's essays are nothing compared to his contribution to the development of the opera. Having decided out of the blue that all great art must take its inspiration from pre-Christian mythology, Wagner set out to create an epic saga combining music and drama in one unified artwork, which he called Gesamtkunstwerk. Easy for me to say. Sounds like a little bit like a sneeze, doesn't it? Wagner's theories saw their fulfillment in his opera cycle Der Ring des Nibelungen, which is actually made up of 4 operas. Just for the record, they are Das Rheingold, Die Walküre, Siegfried, and Göttermorgen. Whatever the hell. You can tell I'm not an opera buff, but I'm trying to get through this stuff, folks. And probably you don't even notice because you're fast asleep and snoring right now, so that's kind of good for me. You didn't catch on to that part there. Wagner's theories saw their fulfillment in his opera cycle, the Ring cycle, which is actually made up. Okay, I already read that. Together, the 4 operas of the Ring cycle tell the story of a magic ring that everyone is fighting over. It is guarded by the Rhine maidens and stolen by the dwarf Alberic. In fact, nearly everybody makes a try to steal the ring. Fafnir, the giant who looks like a dragon, Wotan, the ruler of the gods, Mime, another dwarf, and Siegfried, the dashing hero. Siegfried's parentage, not unlike Wagner's himself, is rather complicated, since his father and mother, Siegblind and Siegmund, were actually twin brother and sister. Ooh, yikes. Brother and sister are, whew. Okay, keep it going here. The story gets even more complicated, what with Brunhilde and the rest, but I'd rather not go into it. Altogether, the Ring operas take about 22 hours to perform. That I didn't know, folks. I'm trying to remember if I even got through 1 hour of it. Let me repeat that again for those of you who didn't hear me clearly. The Ring Cycle opera that he wrote takes, if you're going to start from beginning to end and go all the way through it, 22 hours. Basically a full day to actually get through all of it, to listen to all of it. Now, I think I made it through about an hour. That's about all I could handle. So, Wagner's total output was about 61 hours of music and 53 years of composing, or a little better than 1 hour per year. It's not so bad when you look at it this way. As part of his theory of Gesamtkunstwerk, Wagner developed a compositional style he called endless melody. Endless melody. And then it certainly seems that way when you're listening to it. To do this, he created a leitmotif, or little tune, to represent each important character and many of the stage props in the play. There's one for Siegfried, one for the ring, one for a sword, and so on, not any of them in all. The leitmotifs help the audience to figure out what's happening on stage, which is particularly useful if you bought a cheap seat way in the back of the hall and can't see what's going on. Claude Debussy thought the leitmotifs were silly, saying the leitmotif system suggests a world of harmless lunatics who present their visiting cards and shout their name in a song. That was Claude Debussy's opinion about Wagner and the leitmotif. Speaking of harmless lunatics, Wagner got most of the money to build his enormous opera house in Bayreuth from the Mad King Ludwig of Bavaria. Ludwig was called mad for a variety of reasons, only one of which was for giving so much money to Wagner. Ludwig's private life was a sort on which gossip flourished. Wagner's attitude to marriage was, shall we say, less than exemplary. There always seemed to be some woman whom he found more interesting, for a while at least, than his wife, Mina. Over the years, he spent an evening or several with Matilda Wesendonck, whose husband Otto gave Wagner money anyway to help finance opera productions. Interesting. So, let's think about that. You got a guy that's rich, that's helping Wagner out in the form of paychecks and funding. At the same time, Wagner is boinking Otto's wife, and Otto doesn't give a crap. Interesting world back then. I guess other girls he messed around with would be Julie Schwab, Judith Gautier, and when he was 63 and she was 24, he tried to impress her by climbing a tree, and it must have worked. So dude was 63 and he was going after girls 40 years younger than him. That kind of says something, doesn't it? And of course, Cosima Litz, 28. Oh yes, and her older sister Blondine. Now Litz, would that happen to be related to Franz Liszt? I wonder. He tells about most of these women and others in his autobiography, Mein Leben, which he dictated to Cosima. She makes an interesting study herself. Cosima was illegitimate too, the middle of 3 children born to Litz and Marie de Agoult, who later went on to write novels under the name Daniel Stern. That's interesting. So when Cosima was born, Marie was still married to Count Charles de Gaulle, but that was a mere technicality. The Count wasn't very sure of paternity most of the time either. He solved the problem by referring to all of them as my wife's children. There we go. Hans, let's see, okay, Cosima, whose nickname was Stork, married Hans von Bülow himself, an accomplished pianist and conductor. Von Bülow became a great champion of Wagner's music, even after he found out that the composer and his wife had become, well, rather friendly. And it looks like they had a baby born in 1865. They named her Isolde. Isn't that cute? These guys there didn't care if Wagner was boinking their wife or girlfriend back then, did they? Interesting. I guess he was way up on the totem pole, and they were worshiping Wagner at that point. They even got married for the... okay, wait a minute. Wagner and Cosima had 2 more children, Eva and Siegfried. They even got married for the last one. Von Bülow got fed up with it all after the second child and began to turn his attention to the music of Brahms, who was a bachelor. And Brahms was probably having an affair with Robert Schumann's widow, Clara, but let's not go into that. Wagner definitely let success go to his head, and in the years before his death, in 1883, he indulged himself fully in his love of luxury. Most of his final opera, Parsifal, was composed after hours of soaking in a hot tub full of perfume. His demands for fine clothing made from satin, silk, and fur trim taxed the resources of his seamstress. The seamstress' name was Bertha. He was particularly fond of a pale and delicate shade of pink. Freud would have had a field day with Wagner, but this was before Freud really got started. Mine, I guess, is this a quote from Wagner? Mine is a highly susceptible, intense, voracious sensuality, Wagner wrote, which must somehow or other be indulged if my mind is to accomplish the agonizing labor of calling a non-existent world into being. Fair enough. After all, what's a few pairs of pink silk underwear if it means all 22 hours of the ring cycle? Do you really want me to answer that? One French reviewer called Wagner's operas the music of a demented eunuch. Of course, you know what eunuch means, folks? Most of you might know what eunuch means, but basically, if you don't know, if you're a younger person, or you just don't know about eunuch, of course, eunuchs had their balls cut off, and they would be appointed as security for princesses and you know, girls and stuff like that, because they didn't want to have the security to be attracted to the girls. That's what a eunuch was back then. I don't think they longer do that. Hopefully not. Okay, but let's give the last word to Friedrich Nietzsche. And here's Friedrich Nietzsche's quote: "Is Wagner a human being at all? Is he not rather a disease?" Wow. Good question. And that concludes our little discussion of Richard Wagner. And go check out his stuff. In fact, I'm going to give you a challenge that I couldn't even do myself. Go download the 22 hours of his ring cycles and start when you have a day off the next day and see how long you can make it. Maybe start at 6 in the morning and see if you can actually go to about 4 the next morning, 3 or 4 the next morning, make it through. I couldn't do it. I only made it an hour. Maybe you'll do better than I did. Until next time, kids, and when you wake up, go ahead, don't forget to charge up your computer and everything else, or your phone if you were watching this. And otherwise, have a good night, and we'll catch you more for Music History 101 and story time telling about interesting facts and behind the scenes privacy information about composers, stuff you didn't know, and some stuff I'm learning as well. See you later.